You are an expensive dinosaur, Eric, and as of 9 o'clock and 5 minutes this morning, your position has been officially eliminated. Owen Vance did not even bother to offer me a chair. He sat comfortably behind the massive hand-carved mahogany desk in the executive corner suite on the 42nd floor, his manicured fingernails tapping rhythmically against a freshly printed termination letter. He was 24 years old, fresh out of college with a general communications degree, and had been appointed as Executive Vice President of Operations less than 45 minutes ago by his uncle, our Chief Executive Officer, Gerald Vance. I stood directly across from him in my tailored charcoal blazer, holding a single flat-packed cardboard desk box. My name is Eric Evans. For 7 long years, I served as the principal infrastructure architect at Zenith Core Solutions. I was 48 years old, and I had personally designed, built, and maintained the underlying digital routing architecture of this entire enterprise from the ground up. Owen, with all due respect, I said, keeping my voice quiet, steady, and completely controlled. My infrastructure routing code currently manages every single live transaction across our entire client portfolio. You cannot simply eliminate the lead system architect without a comprehensive operational transition plan. Owen let out a high-pitched dismissive laugh that echoed loudly off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city skyline. Oh, please, Eric, do not flatter yourself. You legacy technology employees love to act like writing server code is complex brain surgery. It is basic maintenance. Anyone with a 2-year technical certificate can press a button and keep a database server running. Your $145,000 salary is an unnecessary operational drain on our quarterly profit margins. We are restructuring this entire division to make room for younger, more dynamic talent immediately. Before I could even offer a measured response, he reached forward and tapped a silver intercom button on his desk terminal. Within 5 seconds, the heavy frosted glass door swung open and a 6 feet 2 inches tall, uniformed private security guard stepped into the office. Owen did not just want to terminate my employment contract. He wanted a public, humiliating demonstration of his unearned executive authority on his very first morning. He wanted the 30 junior developers on the main floor to see exactly what happened when anyone questioned his decisions. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not lower my dignity to plead for my job. 7 years of my life, my health, and my technical expertise were being dismissed in less than 3 minutes by an entitled executive who did not know the difference between a local database and a global routing layer. I picked up the pen resting on the desk, signed the standard acknowledgement receipt, and carefully placed my brass desk clock, my framed system patent certificates, and my personal black ledger notebook inside the cardboard box. The security guard escorted me out of the executive suite and guided me directly down the central aisle of our open-plan floor. 30 junior staff members sat frozen in their ergonomic chairs, watching in dead silence as their lead architect was marched toward the elevators like a security threat. I could see the sheer terror in the eyes of my junior engineers. They knew who actually kept the server grid stable during midnight outages, even if executive leadership remained completely oblivious to it. I held my head high, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my expression entirely neutral. I refused to give Owen Vance the satisfaction of seeing me shed a single tear or lose my composure. What he mistook for passive acceptance was actually absolute icy clarity. As the heavy metal elevator doors slid shut, separating me from the corporate floor, I adjusted the heavy box under my left arm and quietly checked my wristwatch. The digital display read exactly 9 o'clock and 12 minutes in the morning on Friday. In my mind, an invisible countdown clock immediately began ticking down. Owen Vance thought he had just trimmed an expensive line item from a budget spreadsheet to impress his uncle. He had no idea that he had just pulled the master pin out of a $110 million enterprise. The muggy morning air hit my face as I stepped through the heavy glass lobby doors and walked across the asphalt parking lot toward my sedan. Setting the cardboard box on the hood of my car, the sheer weight of the last 7 years came crashing down on me. I had given the absolute best years of my professional life to Zenith Core Solutions. When I was first hired as a mid-level systems engineer 7 years ago, Zenith was a struggling technology startup, operating out of a cramped office with unreliable hardware and unstable revenue. I was the one who pulled 90-hour work weeks to completely rebuild their back-end routing framework from scratch, converting a fragile local network into an enterprise-grade platform capable of processing tens of thousands of real-time transactions every minute. I sacrificed virtually everything for that company. I lost count of how many nights I slept on a narrow metal cot inside the dusty server room during critical cloud migrations, setting alarms every 2 hours to monitor database logs. I missed my younger sister's wedding rehearsal because a primary transaction pipeline collapsed at 3 o'clock. On a Saturday morning, staying glued to my workstation for 36 straight hours to ensure our client network suffered zero downtime, I put my personal life on hold, neglected my health, and deferred family plans. All because I believed in corporate loyalty. I genuinely believed that if I worked harder than everyone else and maintained silent technical excellence, executive leadership would eventually reward my dedication. 3 years ago, Zenith Core Solutions faced a severe cash flow crisis after an international partnership collapsed. Chief Executive Officer Gerald Vance called an emergency meeting in the main boardroom. With tears visibly forming in his eyes, he sat across from me and begged the senior technical staff to make personal sacrifices to keep the company solvent. He sat down with me individually, held my hands, and pleaded with me to accept a temporary 20% salary reduction, taking my pay from $145,000 down to $116,000. He swore on his family's honor that as soon as revenue stabilized, my full salary would be restored immediately, accompanied by a substantial equity stake in Zenith Core Solutions that would secure my financial future forever. Because I was foolishly loyal, I agreed without hesitation. When 3 other senior network engineers resigned shortly after, Gerald chose not to replace them. Instead, he shifted their entire operational workload directly onto my shoulders. For 3 full years, I single-handedly performed the jobs of 4 senior infrastructure engineers, maintaining our global platform at a flawless 99.9% uptime record. During those 3 grueling years, I felt like a ghost walking the corridors of our office. I watched my peers leave at 5 o'clock every evening to spend time with their spouses and children, while I remained tethered to my glowing double monitors, consuming cold takeout food and tracking server performance metrics. The mental and physical exhaustion was cumulative, manifesting as a constant dull ache in my lower back and dark circles under my eyes that no amount of coffee could cover. Yet, I pushed through the exhaustion because I believed that Gerald Vance was a man of his word. I believed that my quiet resilience was building a foundation for a shared future. I convinced myself that when the company finally emerged from the financial storm, my sacrifices would be recognized, and my family would finally benefit from the wealth I was helping to generate. By the end of the 2nd year, Zenith Core Solutions had completely turned its financial situation around, expanding its client portfolio to 84 enterprise accounts, representing over $110 million in annual contract value. But Gerald Vance's solemn promises vanished the moment the corporate bank accounts filled with cash. While my salary remained frozen at the reduced rate and my requests for promised equity were repeatedly brushed aside during annual reviews, Gerald quietly restored his multi-million-dollar executive bonus structure. Within 6 months, he purchased a brand-new 6-bedroom estate in the suburbs and bought a luxurious Mediterranean yacht that he constantly bragged about during company video calls, showing off the polished teak wood decks and custom leather seating. Every time I brought up our written agreement, Gerald would smile patronizingly, wave his hand dismissively, and say, "Now is not the right time, Eric. Be patient. Your time will come." My mistake was believing that silent competence and personal sacrifice would earn me respect in a corporate system driven by greed. They took my loyalty, monetized it into millions of dollars, and mistook my patience for weakness. But sitting in my car that Friday morning, the emotional grief dissolved into a cold, absolute resolve. The era of my unappreciated self-sacrifice was officially over. I opened the car door, reached into my leather messenger bag, and pulled out my private black leather ledger, the one record corporate leadership had completely forgotten existed. Sitting in the quiet front seat of my car, with the glass tower of Zenith Core Solutions reflecting in my side mirror, I unbuttoned my suit jacket and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the initial adrenaline settle into absolute clarity. What Gerald Vance, Owen Vance, and the executive board at Zenith had never taken the time to understand was a fundamental truth of enterprise technology. The prettier a corporate dashboard looks on an executive's screen, the more complex the underlying back-end architecture must be to keep it running in real time. My private ledger contained the precise log of my intellectual property, the software code that made their entire dashboard function. I knew that without my presence, the system was a ticking time bomb, and I had no intention of diffusing it for them anymore. 4 years ago, before Zenith Core Solutions brought its enterprise platform to market, the company was on the verge of losing its initial venture funding due to severe data latency, database drops, and critical security vulnerabilities. They desperately needed a custom, bank-grade middleware handshake layer, a specialized piece of routing software that acts as the central brain, encrypting, validating, and directing every single transaction stream between client endpoints and central cloud servers. At that time, Zenith Core Solutions was burning through cash rapidly and lacked the $600,000 required to commission or purchase that caliber of enterprise intellectual property outright. Because I had spent 2 years independently authoring and copywriting a proprietary middleware routing architecture. Prior to my full-time employment at Zenith, I offered Gerald Vance a flexible alternative through my private single-member firm, Evans Technology Solutions, LLC. My private firm granted Zenith Core Solutions a revocable, non-transferable software utility license to integrate and run my proprietary software, known internally as the Aegis Protocol. The legal terms of that license were crystal clear, drafted by my technology attorney, and signed by Chief Executive Officer Gerald Vance during his second year in office. Under the precise terms of that agreement, Zenith Core Solutions was granted conditional operational use of the Aegis Protocol middleware. However, because the underlying source code and cryptographic keys remained my personal intellectual property, the platform required a mandatory weekly security handshake token to maintain active authorization. Every Sunday night at exactly midnight, my personal developer portal executed an API key verification cycle with Zenith's master servers. Without that verification handshake originating from my developer portal, the Aegis Protocol's built-in failsafe mechanism would trigger automatically. If an authentication handshake was ever missed or formally revoked, the core middleware layer would instantly enter a hard failsafe security lockdown. It would not destroy data or corrupt server files. Instead, it would completely sever the data handshake between Zenith's front-end user interfaces and the underlying database clusters, locking down every single live transaction pipeline permanently until reauthorized by the system owner. What Gerald and Owen Vance never comprehended was that the entire operational capacity of Zenith Core Solutions rested entirely on the Aegis Protocol. And the Aegis Protocol rested entirely inside my private developer portal because I had maintained that system so flawlessly for years, handling every cryptographic key renewal and server handshake quietly in the background. I reached down, picked up my smartphone, and opened my encrypted developer portal. The digital clock at the top of the dark screen was quietly counting down the hours until the next scheduled authentication cycle. The status indicator showed exactly 62 hours remaining until the mandatory Sunday midnight handshake expiration. I placed my Ledger notebook back into my bag, started the engine, and drove home in complete, undisturbed peace. Within 2 hours of returning home, I received an urgent email from Owen Vance, copied to Human Resources and their legal team. The tone of the message was aggressively hostile. Owen demanded that I immediately hand over all administrative passwords, personal code repositories, system master keys, and private developer credentials to his office before 5 o'clock that afternoon. He offered an insulting $2,000 severance in exchange for a strict 2-year non-compete and a waiver of all future claims. The email contained an explicit, bolded warning. If I failed to execute the agreement and surrender all requested technical assets by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Zenith would immediately initiate civil litigation against me for unlawfully withholding corporate property. At the bottom of the message was an attached notice confirming that my corporate health insurance coverage had been canceled effective as of 9 o'clock that morning. A few years ago, a message like that might have panicked me. But as I read through Owen's desperate threats, I felt a quiet, icy calm wash over me. In his rush to demonstrate executive authority and cut budget lines on his very first morning, Owen had committed a fatal management error. He had executed a high-level termination without conducting a technical audit or consulting his own legal department. I opened my personal digital archive and pulled up 2 critical legal documents: my original employment contract from 7 years ago and the independent software utility licensing agreement drafted 4 years ago by my technology attorney. I reviewed the clauses line by line. Section 14. Paragraph B of my employment agreement explicitly stated that any intellectual property, custom software, or trade secrets authored by the employee prior to full-time employment or under an independent corporate entity without direct company development funding remain the sole property of the creator. Even more decisive was Section 8 of the software utility licensing contract. It clearly specified that the revocable license granted to Zenith Core Solutions for the use of the Aegis protocol was directly tied to the active, good-standing employment or consulting relationship of its creator, Eric Evans. In the event of an involuntary termination of employment, without a fully executed intellectual property buyout agreement, the software license automatically entered a conditional review window, reserving my firm's explicit legal right to revoke operational access upon formal notice. Furthermore, I noted that any unauthorized attempt to access, alter, or bypass the Aegis protocol would violate California Penal Code, Section 502, which establishes criminal and civil penalties for unauthorized computer data access and fraud. I did not panic, raise my voice, or make emotional phone calls. Instead, I opened a blank email draft and composed a response that was 4 sentences long, impeccably professional, and legally absolute. I attached a PDF copy of the signed licensing agreement, hit send, and closed my laptop screen. Before my laptop could sleep, my smartphone vibrated. The caller ID displayed Julian Mercer, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Systems. Apex Systems was Zenith's largest and most aggressive competitor, and Julian had spent 18 months trying to recruit me. "Eric," Julian said, "my legal team just flagged an automated regulatory update in the enterprise registry. Did Zenith seriously process a termination notice for their principal infrastructure architect?" "They did, Julian," I replied evenly, setting my coffee cup down. "My position was eliminated this morning to trim their budget." Julian let out a low, incredulous laugh. "Gerald Vance has officially lost his mind. He has no idea what he just threw away. What are your immediate plans?" "I am a free agent," I replied. "The Aegis protocol middleware is owned entirely by my private firm. Zenith's utility license is revoked due to my uncompensated termination." There was a brief silence on the line as Julian processed the scale of what I had just told him. He knew that without the Aegis protocol routing layer, Zenith was nothing more than an empty shell with a pretty interface. "Eric," Julian said, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute business urgency, "I am drafting a formal executive employment agreement and emailing it to your attorney right now. I want you to step in as Chief Technology Officer of Apex Systems. We will double your previous salary, bringing it to $290,000, grant you a 20% equity stake in our enterprise platform division, and give you total authority over our software architecture. Furthermore, Apex will acquire an exclusive license for the Aegis protocol from my LLC under my terms." "Send the agreement over, Julian," I said. "If the contractual terms match what you have described, I will sign it before 4 o'clock this afternoon." After ending the call, I logged directly into my private LLC developer management portal. I navigated to the Active Licenses tab, selected Zenith Core Solutions, and flagged the utility license as revoked due to breach of contract. I did not execute any malicious commands. I did not hack into Zenith's internal servers, and I did not delete a single line of company-owned code. No intervention was necessary. I simply allowed the natural software architecture and legal contractual terms to run their precise course. The automated security failsafe was already hard-coded into the system framework. Without my personal administrative key verification, the API authentication channels would expire automatically at midnight on Sunday. By 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, I had digitally executed my new executive contract with Apex Systems. An immense weight lifted off my chest. I spent the weekend relaxing with my family, sleeping deeply and peacefully without checking server status logs every 20 minutes. At midnight on Sunday, my personal tablet displayed a quiet system notification across the dark screen. License terminated, security failsafe engaged, protocol offline. I turned off the screen, set the tablet on my nightstand, and went to sleep. Monday morning arrived with a clear blue sky, but inside the glass tower of Zenith Core Solutions, a complete operational hurricane had just broken loose. As midnight had passed, the Aegis protocol's automated security failsafe engaged precisely on schedule. Deprived of its weekly verified authentication handshake from my personal portal, the underlying middleware layer entered a hard lockdown, immediately severing the communication bridge between Zenith's server clusters and external client database queries. By 6:30 in the morning, the first automated system warning alerts began flashing across internal monitoring boards. By 7 o'clock, the operational damage was global. All 84 of Zenith's major corporate accounts suffered complete, simultaneous platform failure. Every single live client user dashboard froze instantly, displaying a stark black screen accompanied by a critical red system error. Error 401. Master encryption token expired. Connection terminated. At Zenith, total panic erupted across the technical floor. Junior developers rushed frantically to their terminals, trying to figure out why the entire transaction routing engine had suddenly gone completely dark. But because they had only ever managed surface-level dashboards and basic database entries, they had zero understanding of the underlying middleware architecture. When the lead engineer attempted to force an access bypass through the main terminal, the system recognized the breach attempt and triggered its secondary failsafe. The database tables automatically encrypted themselves, locking the platform down tighter than before. By 8 o'clock, executive phones across the building were ringing off their hooks. The chief executive officers and vice presidents of Zenith's top corporate accounts were calling in an absolute fury. Millions of dollars in live commercial transactions were frozen in midair. International shipping containers were stuck at port terminals. Because manifest databases could not authenticate and institutional clearinghouses were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every minute the network remained down. Owen Vance paced frantically inside his corner office, his face ghost white and his hands trembling, as he listened to a top client chief executive officer screaming obscenities through his desk speakerphone, threatening immediate breach of contract lawsuits. Refusing to admit his utter technical incompetence, Owen marched onto the engineering floor and demanded that the IT team perform a forced hard reboot of the primary server cluster. One of the senior network technicians tried to warn him. "Owen, if we hard reboot the primary clusters without resolving the authentication layer first, we will wipe out the active session cache and corrupt the live data streams." "I do not care about the cache," Owen shrieked, his voice cracking under sheer terror. "Just restart the system, press the button." They executed the hard reboot under his direct orders. The result was catastrophic. The forced restart instantly wiped the active session cache, corrupting thousands of unverified data packets and compounding the operational disaster tenfold. At 9:15 in the morning, as I sat in my new suite at Apex Systems sipping coffee, my phone vibrated with missed calls from Gerald Owen and the Zenith board. By 10, my voicemail was full. The messages shifted from threats to desperate pleas. Gerald sobbed, offering to double my salary, pay a $100,000 signing bonus, and fire Owen if I restored the handshake. At 10:15, I joined an emergency video conference with Gerald, the board, and legal counsel. Gerald sat drenched in sweat, hands trembling. Beside him, Owen stared blankly at the table, while board members watched with cold, furious expressions. "Eric, thank God you joined the call," Gerald gasped, leaning aggressively toward his microphone. We are experiencing a catastrophic system emergency. The entire middleware authentication layer has collapsed. We need you to re-enter your master credentials and execute the manual security handshake immediately. We can finalize your new compensation package the second the network comes back online. I looked directly into the camera lens, keeping my posture straight and my voice completely calm. Gerald, there is no system emergency, I said softly. The Aegis protocol is operating exactly as designed. My private entity, Evans Technology Solutions LLC, formally revoked Zenith's software utility license, effective immediately upon my termination on Friday morning. That software license required an active, good-standing employment relationship. When your vice president of operations terminated my employment without executing an intellectual property buyout agreement, the platform's utility rights expired. Any attempt by your internal staff to breach, force reboot, or reverse engineer that encrypted protocol is a direct violation of federal copyright law and California Penal Code Section 502. A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the conference call. The chairman of the board, an imposing investor who controlled 60% of the firm's voting shares, leaned forward. Gerald, did you or did you not verify that our corporate entity owned the underlying intellectual property of our primary operating framework? Gerald stumbled over his words, stammering incoherently. We assumed the standard employment contract covered all technical output. You assumed? The chairman thundered, cutting him off. He turned his harsh gaze back to my video feed. Mr. Evans, what will it take to license the Aegis protocol back to Zenith on an emergency basis right now? Name your terms. It is not a matter of price, Mr. Chairman, I replied evenly. As of 8 o'clock this morning, I officially assumed the role of Chief Technology Officer at Apex Systems. Furthermore, 3 of Zenith's largest enterprise accounts, including your primary international logistics partner, have already exercised their emergency contract cancellation clauses due to today's service outage. They have executed multi-year enterprise agreements with Apex Systems and are currently migrating their data streams to our infrastructure under my direct technical supervision. Upon hearing that, Owen Vance completely broke down. He sabotaged us, Owen shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the video camera. He planned this entire collapse. He held our company hostage on purpose. The board chairman slammed his fist onto the table. Silence, Owen, he thundered. You marched our principal architect out of the building on Friday morning to save pennies on a spreadsheet without conducting a technical audit or reading a single software license contract. You destroyed this enterprise's entire operational capability. The chairman turned to Gerald and commanded, Gerald, escort your nephew out of the building immediately. His employment is terminated, effective this second. Gerald looked at me through the screen with hollow, broken eyes. Eric, please, we will pay you whatever you want. $500,000, equity, anything. Please do not do this to us. I looked Gerald Vance in the eye for the final time. 3 years ago, Gerald, I took a 20% pay cut to keep your company alive. I gave you 7 years of my life and trusted your personal promise that my loyalty would be rewarded. You forgot that loyalty is a two-way street. You chose greed and nepotism over technical competence, and now you must live with the natural consequences of that choice. Without waiting for a response, I ended the call. By the end of that week, Zenith Core Solutions collapsed. Without the Aegis protocol, their platform remained dark for 4 consecutive days. 80% of their accounts canceled their contracts by Thursday. Zenith's valuation collapsed, forcing them to file for emergency corporate insolvency and initiate asset liquidation to cover their liabilities. Gerald Vance was ousted in disgrace and faces multiple lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty. Owen Vance's reputation within the software sector was permanently destroyed, guaranteeing that no reputable firm would ever offer him a management position again. Meanwhile, inside Apex Systems, our transition was executed with precision. Over the next 30 days, my team and I successfully onboarded 62 of the former Zenith accounts, integrating their data streams into our platform powered directly by the Aegis protocol. Under our licensing agreement, my personal LLC receives substantial quarterly royalty payments, securing my financial independence. One of my very first acts was reaching out to the 3 overworked junior engineers who had watched me get escorted out of Zenith. I brought all 3 of them onto my new technical team at Apex Systems, offering starting salaries 40% higher, immediate health insurance, and equity. They no longer had to endure 90-hour work weeks or unfulfilled promises from arrogant executives. Standing near my window overlooking the city skyline, I reflected that corporate loyalty is a trap. I spent years neglecting my health and family, believing silent competence would be rewarded. The ultimate triumph was stepping into my own power, recognizing the value of my intellectual property, and creating a workplace where competence and integrity are honored. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked out over the morning horizon, and felt a profound sense of peace. I did not destroy their company. They crushed themselves under the heavy weight of their own unearned arrogance.